Welcome to The Week Ahead, a podcast by SBM Intelligence. I'm your host, Veronica Pana Igube. Every Friday, we explore stories that are shaping our continent. Chad has announced its withdrawal from the International Criminal Court, arguing that the court has unfairly targeted African countries. This move adds to ongoing debates about justice, sovereignty, and accountability on the continent. What could Chad's exit from the ICC mean for the fight against impunity and human rights abuse in Africa? Senegalese President Bassirou Diomaye Faye has launched a new party, Kiiraay. This party merged 437 groups to consolidate political parties base. The name means that which protects in Wolof. With 437 parties now united, can one roof truly hold them all? President Bola Tinubu declined to receive the visiting South African delegation, raising questions about the current state of diplomatic relations between Africa's two largest economies. How could tensions between Nigeria and South Africa affect regional cooperation and economic ties? Joining us for further insights is Confidence Mark Harry. Welcome, Confidence, to the podcast.
Hello, Veronica. Hello, listeners. It's great to be back on the podcast.
Yes, it's always a pleasure having you. Today we have three interesting stories, and I can't wait to get your insights about them. Let's start with our first story where we're seeing Chad announcing his withdrawal from the International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court was set up to ensure that leaders, individuals, but mostly political holders who abuse office, especially on human rights issues, to address issues of genocide. I feel this was also to make governments sit up to ensure that during their regime that you don't have instances of human rights violations and other things. But now we have Chad exiting from the International Criminal Court. On the one hand, you're saying, what is Chad scared about? That's one question you're trying to ask. What are you scared about? Why are you living? But it'll be good to hear your perspective on the reason why they are leaving. Was there anything that led to this? Were they also, let's say, requests from Chad to say the ICC needs to stop doing this in order for us to maintain, or they just woke up one day and decided to leave? And what do you think this exit means for the fight against human rights abuses, which is very, very key, especially in Africa?
Yeah, all right. I think it is important to begin with a bit of a background context regarding this particular exit. And I need our listeners to understand that Chad is not the only African country that has left. Very recently, we saw Mali announce its exit. But before that, I think it is important for us to understand the development of these developments. So the Rome Statute that formed the International Criminal Court was signed by, I think, about 25 countries, lots of them global South and African countries in 1998. And within that period, the context was that African states and many countries of the global South were coming off the backs of civil wars and a lot of crisis after just a few decades old from independence, which is even more true in Africa and West Africa particularly, where we've had the Liberian War, we had the Sierra Leone Civil War, we've had many coups, we've had just human rights abuses. We've used basically children and every other people in the wars. I think that same period when the Rome Statute was signed, you had the first Ivorian Civil War breaking out not too long after. And so the West, which pushed for this institution, looked at it as some sort of deterrent against people who would do war crimes, and then to piggyback off the what Nuremberg Tribunal did and bringing people who committed crimes during World War II, especially the Germans, to account. So a lot of African countries were quote unquote convinced to join the court by being a part to it, while many of these other countries, especially in the West, they practically stayed out. The Americans being chief of for the most important example, the Chinese also stayed out. Israel also stayed out, and I'll come to that very importantly very soon. So you have a case where most of the people who signed up to the ICC are smaller countries without that much diplomatic heft and diplomatic clout on the international stage. And the big players who would rather get them to sign off simply stayed out. So we had, for instance, in the US in December 2000, President Clinton signed for American participation, but then President Bush Jr. came in 2002 and then signed it in May of that year. And then after that, you had the US Congress pass the American Service Members Protection Act that authorizes the use of force to extract American or allied personnel from the Hague custody. So if you have a situation where an American had been accused of war crime and they were taken forcefully from any country and they taken to the Hague in the Netherlands, the court, Americans are liable to use force to extract them. So these are some of the issues that a lot of Africans have pointed because many of the convictions, many of the prosecutions that we've seen from the ICC since funding has mostly been Africans. So I'm not going to run you down a few names. In 2012, Thomas Lubanga Dilo was convicted for conscripting and enlisting children under the age of 15 in the DRC. He was sentenced to 14 years in prison. In 2014, 2 years later, we had Jermaine Katanga, who was convicted for war crimes and crimes against humanity in the DRC, sentenced to 12 years. In 2016, we had Ahmad Al-Faki Al-Mahdi, who, after pleading to war crimes of intentionally directing attacks against religious and historic monuments in Mali, was sentenced to 9 years. We've also had Bosco Ntaganda, convicted in 2019 for 18 counts of war crimes and crimes against humanity in the DRC, sentenced to 30 years. We had Dominic Ongwen, who was convicted in 2021 for 61 counts of war crimes, crimes against humanity, including murder, rape, forced pregnancy. And I need to remind our listeners the name Dominic Ongwen is not really that unknown. He was a commander of the Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda, was given 25 years. And then in 2024, we had Al Hassan Abdul Aziz, who was convicted for war crimes, torture, persecution, as chief of the Islamic police in Timbuktu in Mali, was given 10 years. So all of these people, even down to the ones in 2025, have been Africans. The courts, even in the most egregious cases, such as the Bosnia and the Kosovo wars in the 1990s, failed to prosecute or convict people like Slobodan Milosevic, who was on trial before he died, Ratko Mladic, Karadzic, and the likes. So a lot of these criticisms have been arising, and the questions have been about over the past couple of years. And the question is that, is the courts, or was the courts created to target Africans? Because whataboutism have become a little bit many. People are looking at what Israel did in Gaza, and then they're wondering when are Israeli soldiers and Israeli leaders going to stand. As a matter of fact, the current chief prosecutor, that's Karim Khan, decided to bring charges against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu 2 years ago, and led to a couple of countries saying that if Netanyahu steps foot into their country, they're going to arrest him and turn him over to the Hague. And then this was followed by sanctions from the US. Americans have also been indicted. I think Fatou Bensouda, the person who preceded Karim Khan, also tried to bring charges to American soldiers that were accused of human rights violation in Afghanistan, and the court sanctioned her. The Americans sanctioned her and sanctioned the court. Even this one about Benjamin Netanyahu, also, the court has also been sanctioned, Karim Khan has been personally sanctioned, and we're seeing a lot of campaign, to use a Nigerian term, campaign of calumny against this person. You know. So Chad looked at all of these things and then said that, okay, we can no longer be a part of it. So basically, what the Chadians were doing was to play into popular sentiments that have been built in saying that the ICC is some sort of a new colonial institution that is supposed to keep Africans in check, that does not give the same aspirational accountabilities to the Europeans. And so, one major point I would make as I round up is that the reason why we are seeing these many exits, Mali and now Chad, and also I should also mention that when the Malians did this a few days ago, the Americans, that's President Donald Trump, congratulated Mali for doing so, which 10, 15 years ago would have been totally unheard of. So why is this happening now? We think that is responsible for this is that the Overton window has shifted significantly. So in the West currently, especially from the US, you do not have people that are institutionalists anymore. You had people who used to believe in international institutions, liberals, internationalists who preferred to have institutions deal with humanities issues. The setting up of the UN, the setting up of the ICC. The current guys do not believe in that. They are, I don't want to call them transactionists, but they have a strand of isolationism that basically emphasizes on state sovereignty a lot more than what the previous guys did. And so that respect or that appreciation for the courts, the idea behind the ICC no longer subsists. So the accountability mechanism by which, if in 2010 a certain Mali or Chad was trying to pull actively away from the ICC, is going to attract sanctions, is going to attract condemnations from the EU or from the US, is simply no longer there. And so I think the leaders of this country, which of course are not democratic, look at this thing and like, okay, this is best possible time to get out of this course, to get out of this situation with the most minimal blowback possible. And this is what they're going for.
I mean, I do agree with you that we have like a changing system, as you said. There's no longer that will I call it togetherness, right? International institutions, that togetherness that we always, saw with championing it. And you can see the US, the exit from the Paris Agreement as well is also an example of that we're seeing. So let's move on to our next story. Our next story takes us to Senegal, where we're seeing President Faye has unveiled a new political party. And this has brought together about 437 political groups under one single umbrella. I mean, I love the meaning of the name Kiiraay, which means that which protects. I mean, I like that. But I mean, we've seen, will I say, the dismantling of a union between the president and his ally, Sanko, that were once
Former
inseparable
ally. You have
allies.
to.
Former allies. Okay, former allies.
Mhm.
I mean, that they were once inseparable allies. They formed the party together, they campaigned, but now we've seen a kind of dismantlement of their relationship. Sanko, you know, has is on the other end, and you have the president on this end, and he has formed his own political party. I know this has come months after their disagreement over governance and economic policy as well, and their partnership, collapsed. Today, now we're seeing that they lead rival political, camps. This raises a lot of questions for the future of Senegal's reform agenda. What are your thoughts on this new party? What do you think that this new party would bring to Senegal? Do you think that it would be able to be a force against Sanko's party, since he still remains in the other party? Do you feel it would push for the economic? I mean, you have the president on the executive end, you have Sanko on the legislative end. They're going to be at loggerheads for a long time. You know, when the African adage where they say when two elephants are fighting, it's the ground that suffers. So with this happening, what is the fate of, I mean, the people of Senegal? But it will be good for you to give our listeners a background as well, just a little background on the issue and your thoughts on this new party, what it brings for Senegal.
All right. So, yeah, as backgrounds go, we have to go back to 2023, 2024, when um, Faye was elected president. So his election came against the backdrop of a lot of legal trouble for Sonko, who was trying to run for president with his PASTEF party. PASTEF is a very popular youth-led party. I mean, Sonko is basically 44. Sorry, Faye is 44, and a lot of these people are young. So the conviction he had, I think, for sexually assaulting a woman, that's Sonko himself, precluded him from running because the way it was presented was some sort of a political witch hunt by the former party that was led by President Macky Sall. Sall's party lost the election, Pastef won overwhelmingly. Since the provision precludes Sonko from running, he had to tap his lieutenant, Bassirou Diomaye to run. So as the lead up to election came, 2023, 2024, there was this thing called Diomaye President Movement that Sonko created as a vehicle for achieving Faye's presidency. They won the election, and Faye became president, appointed Sonko, who was the party leader, as prime minister. But over the within the period of a year, relations between them broke down. I think outwardly, the most logical explanation was because of how to fix the country's debts. So the IMF came knocking. The former government overcooked the books. They were in serious debt and they did not tell the public. And then these governments came into office and had to deal with the mess. Sonko being a populist favored simply, I'm trying to remember his approach to deal death thing, but it was simply to not go back to the IMF to get more loans, which Faye did not like. Because as a way of paying the debt, you're going to get, what is it called? You're going to increase taxes, which the IMF would like, which Faye would have no choice but to accept, which Sonko absolutely did not want. So I think it led to a breakdown of their relations, and then Sonko left the government, he resigned, and then he went back to the party, and then almost immediately he was elected as president of the National Assembly, and then started making big attempts at impeaching Faye. For about a month or two, Faye was without a party, but that vehicle by which he became president, the Diomaye president vehicle that Sonko created, is what he has now used as the bedrock for the current party that is now known as Kiiraay. So you you have to understand that what is it called now? The launch of Kiiraay is just one key attempt by Faye to establish a support base independent of Sonko and Pastef, which I should mention that Faye was a founding member of Pastef. So Kiiraay is likely an intention to be used as a vehicle by which Faye will contest local elections that are scheduled for January 2027. So we can see these polls that are coming up next year as an opportunity for Kiiraay to establish itself at the local level in preparation for the 2029 presidential election, which we all expect Faye and Sonko to contest. So the races in constituencies in urban areas such as Dakar will be particularly important in building local support ahead of the presidential polls. Now, beyond contesting elections, Kiiraay would also provide Faye with the institutional platform through which he could build an independent political machine and reduce his reliance on pestle controlled structure. So he has brought in this lady. What's her name again? Sorry. Aminata Low. Yes, Aminata Low. As the leader of the party. So her job is to look for all of these organizations, grassroots organizations that supports Faye and make them into a viable political machine. So Pastef has tried to downplay the president's influence and that of his new party. We've seen a local newspaper that is said to be aligned with Pastef claim last week that the what is it called? That Pastef has more majority members in terms of parliament and outside than Kiiraay, and that Kiiraay is not a match, for it, and that even the people who may have resigned from Pastef to join Kiiraay are just a few high dozen profile resignations that do not shake the foundations of the party. So what we are basically saying is some sort of a showdown. Already we are seeing Sonko trying to bolster his public profile by conducting local rallies, giving interviews to international media houses, and the criticism that he had not really put out back when he used to be in government has now becoming a lot less thin veiled. It is now more open. He has accused Faye of abandoning Pastef's policy priorities and instead putting his own political interests above those of the nation. So I think in conclusion, the one thing that we are yet to see, especially from the new party Kiiraay, is that that's communication of explicit policy focus. We haven't seen it. For the most part, we are likely to see Faye prioritize key policy reforms in his first years, things like renegotiating contracts in economic sectors, supporting the hydrocarbon industry, and maintaining a prudent approach to budgetary management. So the major issue that I think would continue to dominate the parties ahead of the local elections in 2027 and then the main elections in 2029 is the debt crisis that threatens the country's macroeconomic stability. So again, I need to remind our listeners that the government has explicitly ruled out the possibility of debt restructuring. And so Faye's government have chosen instead to meet the financing needs through a combination of revenue-based fiscal adjustment and recourse to regional borrowing, which of course, is going to lead to a lot of cuts on social welfare, maybe things like energy subsidies and the likes, which I think Sonko is going to play to his advantage ahead of the elections. So yeah.
I mean, it will be really interesting to see how that all ends up. Now we move on to our final story, which takes us to Nigeria, where President Bola Tinubu decided, decided not to receive a visiting South African delegation. And this has sparked a lot of controversy around the state of the relationships between Nigeria and South Africa. I mean, this has been going on for months where we had xenophobia or Afrophobia, attacks. You had certain individuals in South Africa call for the exit of Africans, foreigners. I mean, the main stress was for illegal migrants in their country, but we also saw the growing attacks of Africans in South Africa, and the response of the government of South Africa was really, really low. We also saw countries like Nigeria as well, Ghana, and other countries take decisive steps for evacuating their citizens out of the country. In our last podcast, we spoke about how the National Assembly also took decisive steps to say investigations need to be conducted on assaults on Nigerians, what has happened to them, loss of their property, loss of life, and kind of like pushing for a documentation of all this. But now we've seen the South African government take a different step where they are sending an envoy to Nigeria, but we've also seen Nigeria, the president saying, no, we're not going to welcome them. What do you think? Do you think this was the right decision by the Nigerian government, by the president, to say, I'm not going to receive your envoy? What message does this send to South Africa? And in South Africa's response, what does South Africa need to do now to ensure that the relationship between Nigeria and South Africa doesn't collapse?
Yeah, I think the one way to look at it is to see and understand that it is possible that South Africa is on the ropes. And the reason they're on the ropes is that for the first time, we are seeing groundswell opposition to the way and manner in which they are behaving. So the South African government is under pressure. And the reason it's under pressure is that we have to understand that I think since the onset of this xenophobic violence, this is the first time that we have seen it sustained and stretched for this long. And secondly, one important context to note is that the current South African government is a coalition. The ANC has significantly lost its vote share, so much so that the last election they have to go into a coalition with the Democratic Alliance. So we've had a couple of public spats where I think some ministers from the DAs have had to resign, and so the DA is also looking at this thing, and I think it has been an unspoken sore point in the relations in the government of national unity between the ANC and the DA, and we are also seeing South Africa's reputation take a hit, especially not even from government sources this time. We are also seeing it from just across the pond, including non-governmental people on social media across the continent. As we've seen very recently with the World Cup that just ended, where we a lot of people had this thing called hate watch. I mean, I was one of them. They were basically praying for South Africa to fail. So, and lastly, a lot of this pressure could also come from the fact that internationally South Africa is not really doing well. The Trump administration, even before the Trump administration, the Biden administration had problems with South Africa because of its undue, quote unquote, undue closeness with Iran, China, and Russia, to the point that they had to be doing joint naval drills with China and Russia. And since the Biden administration left and then the Trump administration came back, the opposition has been really, really big. We've seen sanctions, we've seen spats, we've seen the recall of ambassadors and all of that. So it's been taken to a whole different level. So when we talk about diplomatic, is it what's the word now?
Intervention.
This word failed me. I'm just saying on the diplomatic. Yeah, well, yeah, diplomatic. Just internationally, South Africa's reputation is not that good, which is why you're seeing a lot of these, moves to repair relations. You're seeing of the foreign minister make all of these trips. I think it was in Ghana before he came to Nigeria, and then Tinubu refused to see him. So Tinubu refusing to see him at the moment is the key story, because according to the official presser I saw was that seeing him meeting with the foreign minister or the ambassador or something, whatever it is, was not part of the agenda. It wasn't planned for, so it was an impromptu stuff. And then Biako Ojukwu was the foreign minister, is out of the country, so he had to meet with the junior minister. It's a signal that the Nigerians are not too happy with the South Africans, you know. So I think that for now, the worst is a little bit being avoided. And when I say the worst, I mean a total rupture of relations between Nigeria and South Africa, which in some way will be catastrophic because this is the continent's two largest economies. And they not having diplomatic representations is going to be really, really big of an issue economically on the continent and politically. So there are several ways in which this thing Nigeria would have escalated it. I think I would like to give the Tinubu administration credit for using this, possibly using this as a step one, because again, the message I could have been gotten is that, yeah, you've been a bad boy, go to the corner, go talk to my junior minister. I don't want to see you. I mean, I don't want to give you I don't want to do you the honor of honoring your presence with my presence or something. So it should send a message. I think the kind of message I wasn't gotten in the foreign ministers' visits to other capitals. So if this is the first round of a raft of Nigerian responses to the South African question, I think from the Nigerian perspective, it would really present a shift in not only Nigeria's relationship with South Africa, but in Nigeria's general foreign policy on the continent. But if it does not, I think it will be a little bit sorry for not making South Africans pay for the way and manner in which they've handled this particular crisis, and it will really, really leave a lot to be desired.
Yeah, it does actually. Thank you very much, Confidence. This brings us to the end of our episode. It's always amazing having you on the podcast to hear your views about critical issues that are shaping our continent.
Thank you.
To all our listeners, this podcast is by SBM Intelligence. You can access our podcast by searching for SBM Intelligence anywhere you find podcasts. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, like, and share. And let us know your thoughts on the three topics that we had today in the comment section. It'll be good to hear your thoughts as well. For deeper insights into our work, you can visit our website at sbmintel.com. Remember that you can connect with us on all our social media platforms. You can find us on X, Facebook, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn at SBM Intelligence. Thank you for tuning into the week ahead. Join us next Friday for more updates that are shaping the African continent.